Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and I'm very excited to have back on my program Brian Stutzman, author of the book Warsaw, Illinois, including the Mormon Period. Welcome back to the show.
Well, it's great to be with you virtually this time instead of being in Florida. We'll come see you.
I was telling you offline, like you said, well, send it to my email. I'm like, well, I've had you on the program before, but we did it in person. They didn't do a Zoom call. So this is our first Zoom call interview with each other. And Brian wanted to come on to the program today because, of course, just recently he was a guest on Midnight Mormons and was discussing the film, Who Killed Joseph Smith. And of course, interestingly enough, I was watching it live. I didn't catch the whole thing, but I watched it and then I jumped away. And then a little bit later, I see, oh, Justin Griffin is on now and he's talking. And so part of the reason I had Brian on is he wanted to talk about a few more things that he wasn't not able to get to on Midnight Mormons. And so we're going to talk about that. But before we do that, I just want to say, first of all, been getting good responses from this book. There's some people who've been given some pushback on my book review and the book, but I just want to ask you, since publishing this book, and just kind of tell me what kind of feedback you've been getting from people.
Well, thanks, Steve, for having me on. Yeah, the book's been phenomenal. The people in Warsaw give it out to people who move in, to their neighbors. Unbeknownst to me, I was talking to somebody 3 or 4 months ago, and they said, oh yeah, when we moved here, our neighbor brought over your book. I didn't, it's nice to make the connection. I wrote the book. Surprisingly, I never thought it would really resurface or get some attention, because what happened with the martyrdom, what happened with the mob from Warsaw when they killed Joseph Smith, that was kind of settled until this speculative new proposal came out in the movie. At least that's my opinion. That's the way I see it. And so all of a sudden, the work that I did 7, 8, 9 years ago in researching the town of Warsaw, which is in Hancock County, I'm going to put up a slide for your viewers to kind of see where this is. Here's where Nauvoo is and Carthage. A lot of people have been to Nauvoo and Carthage. Very few people have been to Warsaw. Warsaw was where the mob came from that shot and killed Joseph Smith and Hiram. So, I didn't ever think that would really become a topic again, because it's pretty much settled history. And so, as we're filming this, we're a few days away from the martyrdom, and I thought it would be the anniversary of the martyrdom, and I thought it would be appropriate to kind of revisit, kind of go over the events that happened, and kind of get to maybe a topic or two that we weren't able to get to on Midnight Mormons. Some people put me in touch with Cardin and that group down there, Brad, and I went down to their studios last week. I talked to them Monday, was in their studio Wednesday. We filmed actually 4 different things overnight. And people had tried to get Justin and I together. I had invited him. Other people had invited him on other podcasts. He refused. And so I just kept saying, Cardin, we got to get Justin on. We got to get Justin on. And Cardin was texting him all night. And finally, Justin was able to come on. We had some technical difficulties. I couldn't hear him in my headset, but I could hear him faintly in the monitor. And so we probably didn't have a good exchange as we wanted. I know I certainly wanted a different exchange. And so I've asked him to come on other podcasts in a moderated debate where he has 3 minutes, I have 3 minutes, so nobody's talking on over. But in that Midnight Mormons, you can go watch it. And near the end, he admits that the mob killed Joseph and Hiram. It's right there for you to watch. So I asked him, now that we all know and we all agree, will he change the title of his movie to, instead of Who Killed Joseph Smith, to We Now Know Who Killed Joseph Smith? But he didn't like that idea. I had a friend that said that was kind of a snarky comment on my end. But the bottom line is we agreed. Joseph was alive when he jumped out of the window or fell out of the well. He was not killed in the bedroom.
Well, and in the movie, it shows at the beginning opening scene that he was still alive too, but there was, it was fascinating. And by the way, Justin, just so you know, you've been a guest on my program, and Kimberly Watson-Smith has been a guest on my program as well. I just want to let you know, of course, I have an open door to all of my previous guests are always welcome to come back on the program if they want to address things. I don't know if you wanted to do a debate or anything on my channel, but if you want to come back on the program and discuss things about your movie and stuff and things that Brian said, you're welcome to come on the program. So,
Yeah. And, you know, it's not necessarily that we have to have like this formal debate, but we certainly can have a discussion with a lot of time. I welcome that. So he feels like he's fairly treated and not walked over, and vice versa. I'm not walked over either. I welcome that on any channel, as long as it's fair and polite and you know, dignified. So here's kind of what's going on with the martyrdom. Just to review, and when I wrote my book, I was just going to write about the Mormon period of Warsaw, and then I found, like I said, the city had a fascinating beginning and a really interesting post-Mormon period, and including a big economic boom and then a big bust in the city today. You know, I encourage anybody who goes to Hancock County on a church history tour to stop and see Warsaw. It's went from about 4,500 people population-wise to about 1,512 right now. And so it's got some economic decay, but the history there is so fascinating. So let's talk about, you know, the 1840s in Hancock County. The martyrdom just did not happen in a vacuum. It was a well thought out, and Dallin Oaks says it so well in Carthage Conspiracy, his book. You know, it was a well thought out political assassination that took months, if not years, of planning. And it was not an inside job. There's all the evidence, all the credible evidence points to the people who said that they would do it, the people who said they did do it, and the people who said after the fact that they did do it, and they went to their graves saying that they did do it. And not once did they say anybody in the church was involved in it. So I think there's a couple factors. One is there was a lot of political tension. As Nauvoo grew, the people in the county were being outvoted. Okay, so much so that in 1842, Thomas Sharp, and we'll talk about Thomas Sharp a lot, he was a newspaper editor there most of the time during the Mormon period. And the newspaper changed names a couple times, so we just call it the Warsaw Signal with Thomas Sharp editor. But he and some people got together, including a relative of the Roosevelts, like President Roosevelt, like two President Roosevelts, her cousin lived in Warsaw, and his last name was Roosevelt. And they formed this political party called the Anti-Mormon Political Party. Now think about that. If we had like an anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, what color hair do you have? Kind of brown hair, black hair, anti-brown-haired political party. That just would not fly today. You can't be anti a group of people and really have any credibility. You'd be, you know, the optics would be bad. But they started the Anti-Mormon Political Party in 1842 with the goal of trying to outvote the Mormon population, who voted normally in a group, or what they call block voting. It really got under the skin of the locals, and they wrote about it in the paper how they're, you know, if they have any chance of any local or statewide county control of their government, they've got to band together and vote against the Mormons. Economics, I think we talked about last time we were on your show. The Mormons seem to trade amongst themselves in Nauvoo. And in fact, in the newspaper, Thomas Sharp wrote, "You won't find any goods made in Nauvoo in the city of Warsaw." He was kind of complaining, then he puts a little jab and he says, "And we're better off because of it." No, they weren't, but they were upset. But and then we always, as Latter-day Saints, we kind of always think, Steve, that there was a lot of religious tension, and there was, but most historians say that's a part of it. But it was these other factors too. The fact that Nauvoo had a court system with habeas corpus, where any lawsuit brought against somebody like the prophet or church leaders, that lawsuit would have to go to a Nauvoo judge. The judge would determine whether the charges could go forward or not. And so whether they were valid or not, it was up to the judge to decide whether the charges went through. And that frustrated people in the county, because they couldn't get anything to stick. Now, to the church's defense, so much so many lawsuits were just bogus lawsuits that were just filed to harass the prophet. And so the saints felt like habeas corpus was a godsend because it just really cut out the harassment. But the locals found it to be frustrating. And so the last thing is, honestly, they despised Joseph's notoriety. Joseph was a nationally known celebrity in the newspapers all over the country. And when he ran for president, I think that heightened the local jealousy. People coming from England, coming up the river past Warsaw, you saw on the map, hundreds, thousands of people would pass by Warsaw and they'd say, where are you going? They say, oh, we're going to go see the Mormon prophet. And these farmers and stuff would say, well, you know, we were up there. We know Joseph Smith, some of them, most of them who participated in the martyrdom had never met the man. But so they're like, he's just a guy. Why are you guys coming up here? A lot of jealousy. And so I think the powder keg that kind of started the events, the martyrdom, Steve, was the expositor. And most of your viewers will know about the expositor. Are you okay if we go there? Or do you want to stop and talk about anything else?
I think let's just talk about that. But you make your case. And
yeah. So that's kind of the backdrop here. We've got this little town 18 miles south of Warsaw, and we got this town in Carthage, and they're full of non-Mormons, and they see just Nauvoo grow and get powerful, and they have a lot of tensions. And so in June of 1844, William Law and the Fosters and the Higbees kind of get together and they start the Reformed Mormon Church. And they believe in Joseph's revelations, the Book of Mormon, these things, but they feel like he's a fallen prophet now. Now, here's what happens in Warsaw that Thomas Sharp picks up on this and writes a big front page article. The Mormons are at it amongst themselves. The most principled ones, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, the smartest ones have broken off and they started this new Reformed church. And it's going to be really interesting. We hear that they have on order a printing press. And it's going to be interesting to see what they print. And sure enough, they print one edition of the Nauvoo Expositor. And it had a lot of allegations against Joseph. It called for mobs to attack the city. The city met, the city council met, they went over current law at the time, and they felt like that was in their right to order the sheriff to go and destroy the press. After all, their own press had been destroyed in Missouri in 1833. Other presses up and down the river had been destroyed. People say, well, what about this freedom of the press? First Amendment, right, Steve? Well, the bottom line is that wasn't a federal law at the time. It became, a national law that became federalized with the 14th Amendment.
Right, 14th Amendment. So it basically didn't apply to the states or local jurisdictions. It was First Amendment within the federal government.
They, according to their understanding of the law at the time, the city council felt it was completely illegal for them to come and destroy the press. Others have opined that maybe they should have just locked it up and not destroyed it because it was private property. So they didn't think they really did anything wrong. And it was calm. It was under the direction of the sheriff. It wasn't some wild mob. But let me tell you, the people who were doing the press got really mad, and they ran to Warsaw and they stirred up the local newspaper, and they put a letter in the newspaper that said, we've been robbed of our rights. And I'm going to show this next. Probably the most famous thing ever published in the Warsaw newspaper. So Charles Foster come and he puts this, if you can see this, he writes this letter explaining what happened. And he writes above this red block, according, 200 men came armed and equipped with musket swords and pistols. And they basically, took a sledgehammer and tumbled the press materials into the street. And then he signs it. And then Thomas Sharp, and he physically brings this letter. And so Thomas Sharp puts this in the newspaper, and he tells his readers, he said, we received the above communication by the hands of Charles A. Foster about, I think it says just past 11 o'clock today. We have only to state that this is sufficient. War and extermination is inevitable. So again, that word extermination, which the Mormons had been exterminated from Missouri. And then Thomas Sharp, again, this is in the Warsaw newspaper. Citizens, arise one and all. Can you stand by and suffer such infernal devils? And then he goes on and says, we have no time for comment. Every man will make his own. Let it be made with powder and ball. Okay. So they were mad. They put it in the newspaper. You publish something like that today, you'd probably, end up in court against somebody specifically, right?
Mhm.
So the day of the martyrdom, June 24th, okay? Excuse me, June 27th,
7th.
sorry. June 27th, 1844. Joseph, Hiram, a couple others were in the jail overnight. I think when I was on your show before, we talked the night of the 26th, how Dan Jones received Joseph's last prophecy. One thing I didn't bring up on Midnight Mormons, Steve, is that earlier Joseph had prophesied about Willard Richards being in kind of a hailstorm, a hail of bullets, and not being injured. He had a nick on his ear. Joseph had great prophetic gifts. He prophesied about Willard. He prophesied about Dan Jones. Dan Jones received the last prophecy. It's a phenomenal prophecy the night before. And Joseph told many people he went to like a lamb to the slaughter and different things like this. But not once did he ever say, Steve, that I'm going to be killed with a Judas in my midst. I'm going to be betrayed like Christ was. I'm going to have one of my followers shoot me, or two of them, like this movie possibly suggests. And he definitely was in the height of his prophetic glory near the Carthage jail time. There's 2 or 3 prophecies, bam, bam, bam. And he would have said, hey, if I die today, talk to Willard and John. They're the guys behind it. He never said that. And he would have. In fact, he indicated that, he's going to go and, he's not going to be saved. He's not going to return. And he knew it was going to be a mob. So that night, the 26th, the night before, there was some wrestling outside. And the movie kind of gets it wrong because they say the mob returns. Now, the morning of the 27th, a mob gathers in Warsaw. We call it a mob. It was 3 military regiments. Okay, 2 from Warsaw, 1 from Green Plains. The Green Plains was led by Levi Williams. And they go up to a point called Golden's Point. And I don't, I'll kind of go back to this area here. It's kind of, if you were to take Warsaw, Nauvoo, and Carthage, I'm kind of point in the middle of the triangle here. That's where Golden's Point is. And they go up there and they meet, and the governor Ford's over in Nauvoo, and Nauvoo scolding the saints. And he sends a messenger to the mob and says, hey, go home. And some of them did. But at the same time, there's a guard, a Carthage Gray Guard. His name's Frank Worrell. And he sends a note to Levi and to Thomas. And he says, hey, we got Joseph here. He says, now is the time to do the deed. And so they talk about it more and they vote to go on. And so they go on to Carthage, and, 100 to 150 men, depending on the account, they blackface, some had yellow, some had red. They disguise themselves. They storm the jail. And the first thing that happens is they go up the stairs, and Joseph actually thought it was the Nauvoo Legion coming to rescue him. He opens the door and he pulls back his fists and gives him a bare knuckle sandwich, and they tumble down. And they regroup, they get their guns out, they start firing. Now, here's what we need to know about the room. We can't go to a crime scene that's 177 years old and get any credible evidence. We can't even go to a crime scene a week later and have it hold up in court unless it's been preserved. This room was not preserved. If you go there today, the window seal is not the original. That was gone a long time ago, the window that Joseph fell out of. The stairs going up are not original. The door, I've been told, is not original. In fact, it's just the panel, and who knows if they put it back right, the panel with a hole in it.
Oh. Interesting.
So not only have you got that, they took off some of the I don't know, plaster back in, I think, 20s or 30s. The McRae's, Eunice McRae and her husband were called as missionaries back there. And the crime scene had been tampered with so much they couldn't really find the bullet holes. See, Jacob Hamlin came the day after the martyrdom. There was like 50 something bullet holes, something like that. Later on, there was people counting 40, 50 bullet holes. That was all revamped because the church didn't have access. They didn't even own the jail till what? I don't know what it was, 1920s, 1930s, whatever. It had been a private residence. So much had happened. So we're trying to go back in 2022 to 177-year-old crime scene in this movie, trying to recreate based on 2 accounts. Now, the 2 accounts were not depositions. They were people's reminiscent thoughts. We're talking John Taylor and Willard Richards. John Taylor, one of them was like 10 years old. And, you talk to somebody who's been in a traumatic situation and 10 years later, and they're not specifically telling the story to give exact facts, but maybe an overall view. I mean, Steve, when we were down there with you, we took you to a restaurant, right?
Yep.
Remember that?
Yep.
Now, if you were to describe, that's just 6 months ago, describe it, write it down, and I describe it, write it down, a reader is going to think we went to 2 different restaurants because you will tell the story so much different than I did. And it should be that way because of what was the same, it would be suspect. And so it's natural for Taylor and Richards to tell 2 different stories, slightly different, just like the Gospels in the Bible are different. That actually adds the credibility. Okay. So
well, I just have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So one of the things in the movie that he makes in the documentary is he talks about how there's a lack of pockmarks or damage on the outside of the building, that if they were shooting indiscriminately towards the window in the building, that it should be full of like damage from those bullets. Do you have anything to say to that?
No, I know that there has been people talking about that. 177 years later, I'm not buying the fact that there was just a bunch of random people shooting at the building.
Okay.
They were shooting at Joseph. We do know that the jailer's wife said a bullet came buzzing by her through the window. I'm not looking for a bunch of pot marks on the outside. They could have been repaired, changed, or even weathered.
I was just curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, that's not too concerning. I hope they don't suggest that because there wasn't a lot of bullet holes that no bullets were shot from the outside, because that's not credible.
Yeah, that's kind of what he was implying in the movie. Yeah.
So we get the mob that goes upstairs, right? They're shooting into and Joseph has 2 guns and he's there to protect. He said this before. He said he took a gun to protect his friends. He shoots a couple bullets down, hits 2 or 3 guys. Gallagher is one of them. There's a little gunfight, then the shots keep coming in. Now let's use some logic here. This theory that it was an inside job. Number one, why did the inside people, Taylor and Richards, why did they wait till the very moment the mob was there to kill Joseph and Hiram? If it was an inside job, they didn't know the mob was coming. So why wait and not just do it? Number 2, why didn't they just let the mob do the job? The theory, Justin's theory, is that Willard and John shot Joseph and Hiram. If people are shooting in the room, why not just let them do it?
Yeah, hide under the bed.
Number 3, why did Willard and Taylor, or let's be respectful, Richards and Taylor, fight against the mob and hold the door shut if they were in cahoots with the mob and had their own lives at risk being shot at themselves? Why didn't they open the door and say, hey, my friends, come in. Hiram and Joseph are right here. We'll hold them while you shoot them. They put their lives on the line to try to hold off the mob beat their guns down with walking sticks and canes. The theory that Taylor and Richards were behind it makes no sense. When they were putting their when Taylor was almost killed. Okay, here's what I didn't say on Midnight Mormons. Here's the bombshell.
Okay.
Well, first of all, the theory is that possibly Brigham Young was behind it all. Well, that's impossible for a couple reasons. Brigham Young was in Boston. There was no way that he would have known that Joseph and Hiram were even in the Carthage jail. Mm-hmm. It took too long. Joseph and Hiram were there, they were in their third day, I think. It took weeks, at least a long time, to get word to Brigham, and for Brigham to say, okay, let's get, write a letter to the mob or to the people inside the jail. Let's kill Joseph and Hiram now. That's problem number one. Brigham Young would not have had the communication, would not have known. Number two, there was no indication that anybody knew, at least at that time, that Brigham would be the successor. Mm-hmm. Okay. You had, first of all, Hiram was the assistant president of the church, and there was no indication that if they killed Joseph, that Hiram wouldn't survive, that he would be the successor. Number two, Sidney Rigdon was a counselor in the presidency, and he had rightful claim. Number three, Samuel Smith was still alive after the martyrdom. Now he died, a couple of weeks later, but he was a rightful successor. And Brigham Young was kind of like way down on the food chain. Why would he have Joseph killed when it was super unclear that he would be the next leader of the church?
And we would think if you were planning this, that you would probably want to eliminate the people that were ahead of you first before you got to the prophet, and kind of position yourself there too.
Yeah, be first in line, and that didn't happen. So, the next day, that afternoon, as we know, after the martyrdom, first of all, Joseph was alive when he fell out, and he possibly could have survived if they had leaned his body up against the well and Levi Williams and his firing squad shoot at Joseph and kill him. So who killed Joseph Smith? It was Levi Williams' firing squad. That's the answer, because he was alive before that, and he could have survived. He only had a couple wells. I think he ended up having 4 or 5 shots, and we think maybe 3 or 4 of them 2 or 3 came from the firing squad at the well. So the court case was the people versus Levi Williams, not the people versus John Taylor, not the people versus Willard Richards, because everybody knew it was Levi Williams. Okay. That night, they go to the Warsaw House. Now, if you go to Warsaw today, there's this building there on the same site. We know the front was built in 1904, right here. But the old part, it is said, was where the mob met. Now, this is the kitchen part. We're not quite sure. The local records aren't clear whether this was built in the 1830s or a little later, but we do know that this site is the Warsaw House where the mob met. And the Mormon waitress, 18-year-old Eliza Jane Graham, unknown to the mob, but she was a member of the church, came and met starting about 9 o'clock, and 50 to 60 people gathered, and she served them. Her aunt, Ann Fleming, not a Mormon, cooked the meals. One of the guys that was shot sat around the fire and talked about how they were just at Carthage, how they killed Joseph. The people that Eliza was serving all bragged about how they just had killed Joseph and Hiram. Okay. Eliza, became the star witness for the prosecution at the trial the next year, and her aunt became a witness for the defense. Not once did the mob say that night or at trial or later in their lives, we came to Carthage to kill Joseph, and guess what? It was already done. Not once did they say that. Not once did they say, and there was a group of them, we were in cahoots. Brigham paid us. Willard paid us. Taylor paid us. We were trying to be their friends, or they were trying to be our friends. We all had a common enemy. That just never came out. In fact, they stood trial. 9 people were indicted the next year, and 5 stood trial, and they could have been hung. And not once did they say, you know what? It's time for us to come clean. You're trying the wrong people. There's 5 of us. We don't want to be hung. We'll let you in on a secret. It was Taylor and Richards that you need to have here and Hangman, because they were the ones that were behind it. Not once did anybody say anything like that. So
one of the heroes of your book is Eliza, and you talk about her. I think it's one of the more moving parts of your book about the courage that it took for her to do that, especially when, harm could have come to her as well. So I think it's a great story, and I think that's another reason why I need to get this book, because you detail that as well.
Thanks. I was excited to find that story. It's not widely known. She is the most famous, most important unknown character, female heroine in church history, in my opinion. I just love Eliza, and I've become friends with some of her descendants. We had a painting commissioned. I'd like to show you this article here. This is after the trial. Warsaw resident John Hay, who served as President Lincoln's personal secretary and as an ambassador for the United States to several countries, wrote an article in 1869. Now, he was a small child at the time of the martyrdom, but his dad was the doctor, Charles Hay, for the Warsaw troops. And he wrote this community memoir about the whole Joseph Smith murder and trial. So after the trial, it was kind of a kangaroo court. He writes, concerning the acquittal, there was not a man on the jury in the court in the county that did not know the defendants, these are the 5, had not done the murder, but it was not proven, and the verdict of not guilty was right in the law. Nowhere did they say, they were talking about the defendants, Thomas Sharp, Levi Williams, Jacob Davis, William, Grover, those guys. Not once did they say, you know what? Those guys were fall guys for the Mormons. They really got paid by Brigham Young to do this, or they were in cahoots. So the movie falls on its face. The mob said that they were going to do it. They said they did it. They stuck to the story all their lives. Now, we got to remember the year after the trial, 2 years after the martyrdom, the same mob is part of what drives the saints out of Nauvoo. We have 3 main waves starting in February 1846, the summer wave, and then the poor camp later. And before all the Mormons got out of there was a Battle of Nauvoo. Those people are like, I never heard of this. Well, people from Warsaw, including Thomas Sharp, goes up and they bombard Nauvoo and drive the saints, the remaining saints. This is what, August, September 46, and in that time period, drive the remaining saints out. Now, wouldn't Brigham Young and those guys say, John Taylor and Willard Richards, wouldn't they stand up and say, hey, what the heck? We were in cahoots with killing Joseph Smith, and now you're turning on us? And they would make it public. Not once did they say. So the people who killed Joseph and Hiram hated Brigham Young and the saints as much, and drove the saints out of Nauvoo. So that's kind of what happened with the martyrdom, and that, I have a lot of problems with the movie that we've talked about. As I watched, I took 7 pages of notes of errors and just things that didn't seem right to me. And I think there's an agenda here, and I understand they're coming out with a second movie. I don't think, in my opinion, that this movie was really trying to get to the bottom of who killed Joseph Smith, because we know who killed Joseph Smith, and Justin even said it on Midnight Mormons. I think, I'm speculating, my opinion, that they've got a larger agenda to try to maybe bring people out of the church some way, to create doubt. They've got their own movement, by the way, from what I understand. And I don't want to get too far down the road, because I'll admit I don't know everything about their movement. I've heard quite a bit, but I don't have firsthand knowledge. So that might be an avenue for you to explore, Steve. But the bottom line is, we got to look at the motive of the mob. You can't look at 2 or 3 minutes. You have to take a holistic viewpoint. And the reason we can't look at 2 minutes, because a crime scene is far from being preserved. That makes no sense. You go to any detective and you say, I want to visit a 177-year-old crime scene and try to get definitive answers of what has happened there, and it was not preserved. do you think I could be very successful? Most police detectives would say that's just really, all you're going to end up is speculation, is what I would think that they would say. And when you've got this holistic viewpoint, and when I did my research on Warsaw, like I told you, Steve, I had no idea that this was going to resurface in 2022. This whole topic, it was settled history. And now we've got some speculations. We got a movie based, I think there was 6 mileposts or 6 benchmarks that were completely, in my opinion, arbitrary to try to form a different narrative. And you guys say, well, is there a motive behind it? And at least to me, it appears that there might be, and that is to have people question their faith and their testimony in the church. I've had people, I'm in a church position right now. I actually had a congregant come to me and ask me about this. Little did he know that I had actually written the history of Warsaw and had studied the mob and studied the town for years. And we quickly dispelled some misinformation that this congregant had. And I'm just thinking that, I don't know how many people have actually, had their faith shattered or by this movie. Justin tells that he's had people come up just in tears. And I'm like, people make their opinions and grow or decline their testimonies sometimes by the information that they have. And if they've got wrong information, we need to go out and at least, I'm trying to at least put correct information out. So I hope the story and discussion we've had today, Steve, is helpful to your viewers and viewers that may have friends, relatives, neighbors, people that they go to church with that have had questions about this theory that it was an inside job. The evidence, the overwhelming evidence, the proven evidence for 177 years has been that it was the mob from Warsaw that did the deed, and it was no way an inside job. And we're really splitting words and definitions and hairs if we're trying to suppose that we can make some theory come together.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on the program and discussing with you some of the stuff that you weren't able to get to on Midnight Mormons. And again, I want to thank you again for coming on the program. I really appreciate you, Brian. I appreciate your book. I appreciate the work you're doing to tell the story of Warsaw. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap things up?
I just want to thank you again for your time. You do a good work here. You have a wide variety of resources, and if of voices that you have on your program. And if somebody from the movie want to come on and have a moderated discussion with each person having time, I'm more than willing to come back.
Yeah, and that's the invitation, Justin. Now, you came on my program a few days after the movie was released, and you felt that you were treated fairly. I've had some communication with you, not much recently, but I just want to open the door to you that if you think this would be a venue that you would like to participate in, everybody feels that I'm a fair broker here, and I don't take any sides. And so maybe this could be a format that you might want to consider. So the invitation's out there, Doctrine of Christ people. I've reached out to some of you. I just want to let you know I'm not taking sides. So if you think that I am, I'm not. To me, the side I want to be is on the truth, right? But I also want to make sure, like I said, all the voices of the restoration are going to be heard on Mormon Book Reviews. And you are a voice within this wider movement. So, let's talk. Let's just try to have civil discourse.
Steve, you're always a fair forum. That's how I'd like to describe you, a fair forum, and so I appreciate that. I'll just leave with the closing thought here, Steve, to all your viewers. We established on Midnight Mormons, and you can watch the end, that Joseph was alive when he fell out the window, and he was murdered at the well by Levi Williams' firing squad. Justin agreed to it. If we understand correctly, he may feel like he misspoke, but I heard him say that he agreed that Joseph was killed by the firing squad. Everybody around that was eyewitnesses that testified both then and later said that that's what happened. I believe that's what happened. So what we've got here is the answer. Who killed Joseph Smith? The firing squad. And that's why the court case was the People versus Levi Williams, who was the leader of the firing squad.
Okay.
So we have an answer. Who killed Joseph Smith? Levi Williams firing squad.
Okay, there you
Have a
it,
great
folks.
day.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, I just want to remind my audience a few things before. The merch store is open. Go to MormonBookReviews.com. Get yourself a hat, get yourself a phone case. We got a lot of great merch, and that helps support our program. And I also want to remind you, I do have supporters that financially support the program via Patreon. I want to thank all my patrons there helping, as well as people who like to give direct contributions on PayPal as well. I want to thank all of you for those contributions. And, I just want to thank my audience for taking the time to listen to us today, to hear Brian's story and what he wanted to get out there that he wasn't able to on Midnight Mormons. I'm glad I was able to provide that venue. All my previous guests have an open invitation to come back on anytime they want. And so I'm glad that you took advantage of that invitation, Brian. And thanks for coming on.
Well, have a nice day.
All right, folks, you'll have yourself a great day. Don't worry, be well. Everything's going to be fine, and have yourself a fun summer.